started school in 1950, in the new school.
Yeah.
The new school was unlike the old school, which had just a stove for heat. They had put lights in it.
Mm-hmm.
They had put electricity in it. But our new school, of course, was all modern, had tile floor,
Yeah.
a basement with bathrooms instead of the outhouses that they used to have with the old school.
Mm-hmm.
So it was all modern. By the time I got there, it was modern. Yeah. And that's the first year that I remember writing the year
Mm-hmm.
on my paper. So you're writing it on your paper,
Yeah.
right? Every day, 1950. The other thing about school, I'll have to read you sometime the poem that I wrote about the old school.
Mm-hmm.
But one of the things that I remember, the king, King George,
Mm-hmm.
was still the king. Queen Elizabeth's father
Mm-hmm.
was still the king.
Mm-hmm.
When I started school, he died in 1952.
Mm-hmm.
So every morning we had our salute to the flag.
Mm-hmm.
We had God Save the King,
Mm-hmm.
the anthem, God Save the King, and we had a prayer
Yeah.
before we started school every morning. That was our ritual every morning.
Yeah.
And then we'd be down to work. And so I remember when the king died and Queen Elizabeth became queen,
Mm-hmm.
and we started singing God Save the Queen
Mm-hmm.
instead of God Save the King.
Mm-hmm.
So that was how many years ago?
and this for people just
1952.
for reference, it's because you're talking about when you lived in Canada.
Yes, I was Canadian.
Yeah, you were Canadian.
I was
You're Canadian. So
yeah.
that's just in case people don't understand. What do you mean the king? And
What do you mean
it's
the king and
because
the queen?
I
I was
you lived in
Canadian.
Canada.
I was living in Canada, yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, I was Canadian. Yeah, and I was the farmer's daughter. My dad took me to school on the tractor.
Mm-hmm.
We had this, I was about in second grade, I think, and we had this really, really cold spell this particular winter. And Dad said, she can't walk to school in that, it's too cold. He said, I'm going to take her on the tractor. He had no car. Going to take her on the tractor. So he had this board thing that he had made that fit into the back of the tractor so that he could carry a barrel of water or feed or whatever, you know, around the farm. So he put that board in there, and he put a blanket on it and a blanket around me, and took me to school on the back of the tractor and dropped me off at school.
Never works.
It worked. And for those couple of weeks that it was so cold. And so anyway, this particular day, it must have been really bitter cold. And Dad said, okay, he said, I'm putting my scarf over your face, and you keep that on there to keep you from breathing that cold air into your lungs. So he put that scarf on me, and when I took it off, I had chewed a hole in it. So I chewed a hole through Dad's scarf. And I thought, oh dear, Dad's going to be really upset about this. So I walk home with it, you know, at the end of the day, walk home with the scarf and show Dad what I did to his scarf. And it was his good silk scarf that he wore with his overcoat and his suit.
Oh.
And it's like, oh dear, you know, his good silk scarf. And I can remember the scarf perfectly. It was like a navy bluish paisley, you know, really nice scarf. Yeah, with the nice fringe on the end.
Were you like nervous or something? Why were you chewing on it?
Well, I was always nervous.
Oh.
I was a nervous wreck as a kid.
Yeah.
I used to chew my pencils until I chew all that yellow off.
Really?
Chew my fingernails down till they bled. I was a nervous wreck. And that's why I needed school, and I needed other distractions.
Outlets.
Outlets. I needed outlets. Yeah. And that's why I buried myself in that stuff, you know, and in reading and, yeah. And in my little sisters and brother and, yeah. I read to them all the time. We played all the time.
What's the age difference between you and your next one? Is it 4?
3 years.
3 years.
3 years between Pat and I. We slept together, and we didn't realize, you know, with all the tonsillitis and everything that she had, that she has impaired hearing. Didn't realize that for years. And we'd lay in bed at night and talk, you know, and I'd say, well, we got to put the light out, and she'd say, well, I can't hear you when the light's out. Of course, I didn't realize that she was lip reading.
Yeah.
Nobody picked up on it.
Nobody knew she couldn't hear.
No.
And she didn't know any different.
No.
So she didn't know that she couldn't hear.
No.
Like everybody else.
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. And she would, you know, I'd help her with her homework. And I'd say to her, now you weren't paying attention because the teacher explained all that to you today. Say we were in the one-room school.
Yep. So
I knew what the teacher was teaching her. But when it would come to doing her homework, she didn't know. And it's like, you've got to start paying more attention because you're not paying attention.
Yep.
You know. But what was happening was when the teacher was talking to her, talking to the class, but then the teacher would turn her back and do these things on the board.
She didn't read her lips.
She wasn't hearing her.
Yeah.
And it's like the teacher showed you all that, told you all that today. Now you got to pay more attention. Not picking up that she wasn't hearing. Yeah.
When was it finally caught that it was a hearing issue?
I don't know if it ever was.
Really? Wow.
No. I don't think it, you know, not until we were older and realized she couldn't hear. You know, she was hearing enough that if she was over in the kitchen and you called her name and she was looking at you and you talked to her, you know, you just weren't picking up that she wasn't, you know.
Yeah. She couldn't fully hear.
Wasn't able to hear. And then my brother, he was in 1st grade and I was in 6th, I guess, when he started school. I think I was in 6th grade. So he was only in 1st grade while I was still there in that school. Because they moved 7th and 8th out of that school and put them in Centerville. And so the teacher's going around the room asking people what they thought they'd like to be when they grew up. They came to him and he said a monkey.
A monkey.
And he was. And he grew up to be one.
A monkey. That's funny.
I want to be a monkey.
Like you're going backwards.
What's with you? Of course, Pat and I were more refined. But our brother wants to be a monkey. But the one-room school was excellent for learning. I mean, and the teachers were great. And they would make sure that everybody had things that they were doing, like you had your reading while she's doing, and you had your writing, and you had your geography or whatever while she's teaching another grade. And then she'd move on and give that grade something to
So
do.
just hit each grade.
She'd hit each grade.
Yeah.
Yeah.
That's cool.
And teach, yeah.
And it is, if you think about it, yeah, you're right. If you're in that environment and you're like a younger age, but she's teaching the older stuff, you're bound to pick that
You're
up.
picking it up.
Yeah.
Yeah. I picked up a lot.
Yeah.
That way. Yeah.
So by the time you get to that grade, you're probably like, I already know this.
Well, you know a lot of it.
A lot of it.
You have a base, you know, you
Yeah.
have a basic knowledge of it.
Yeah.
Yeah. Where, you know, if you're in a one grade classroom, you're only getting that grade's work. You know. I always thought that, well, I thought it was great. I loved it. And I excelled there, you know, myself. We had a couple of kids. This one boy went to the basement, asked to go to the basement. Well, go to the basement was to go to the bathroom. He asked to go to the basement. He went to the basement, and a mouse ran across in the basement, and he hollered, "Oh, Jesus Christ!" And he came upstairs and the teacher was furious with him for swearing, calling the Lord's name in vain.
Is swearing.
Swearing.
Yeah.
You stand in the corner for swearing. She said, and so he wanted to explain to her why he was swearing. You know, it was a mouse. You know, it was a mouse.
Scared me.
It scared me. You know, he was like, you know, 3rd grade or something.
Yeah.
You know.
So how would you compare your experience with school to like modern day schools?
Modern day school's no fun.
No.
Not compared to what we did and what we had.
And I feel like it's too much. So like going back to what you were saying with the multiple grades in the one room.
Yeah.
I think that's kind of cool. I mean, and that's kind of how I teach the kids with homeschooling, is that they don't necessarily stick to their grade. If Aiden is beyond reading, he's way up in the 12th grade level of reading.
Right.
Do you know what I mean? So I let him read that stuff. Like it's not, they're not
Yes.
stuck to just that grade.
Right.
If Emily already knows something in math,
Yeah.
I take her to the next grade.
Take her to the next level.
Yeah, she goes up to the next level. It's not.
Yeah.
It's like beating a dead horse. Like they already know it. There's
That's
no
right.
need to keep pounding
That's
it.
why kids lose interest. As far as school went, I mean, I loved
It
school.
was fun.
I loved school. We had a blast.
I feel like I would have loved it too if
Yeah.
school was like that.
And even walking to school and back.
Mhm.
Oh, I didn't tell you about that. I had my fairies that walked with me and everything. I didn't tell you.
Your what?
Fairies.
Your fairies. You had fairies walking to school with you?
I
I want to
did.
hear about this. Get comfortable.
Well, in the fall, which was, you know, you're starting school in the fall and the leaves are starting to fall and
Yeah.
everything. And there's these certain beech trees.
Yeah.
We'll have to do one of these sometime.
Yeah.
We had these beech trees, and the beech leaves, when they would fall, instead of just falling, you know, a flat leaf,
Mhm.
they would curl and roll up like a, you know, in a roll.
Yeah.
Not a long, you know, a long roll.
Mhm.
So that the fairies rolled up in them for the winter. You know?
Oh.
Yeah, to stay warm. So that was where the fairies went in the winter.
Gotcha.
In the fall.
Okay.
Started getting cold, the fairies started getting into these leaves, right? All the sparkles on the snow
Mhm.
were fairies
Fairy-
dancing.
Fairies dancing.
Yeah. Oh, they danced.
I love the imagination.
Yeah, the fairies danced
I
on
do.
the snow.
With
I was
fairy
a fairy
dust
person.
everywhere.
Fairy dust, yeah. I came home one time and I told my mother that I saw a real fairy. And I described it to her, and she would tell me about it every now and then. I remember that fairy that you saw. And she even had striped stockings.
So you had details.
I had details. And turned up shoes. Turned
up shoes, yeah.
Yeah. And she would tell me about every now and then. She'd say, "Don't you remember that fairy that you saw?" That fairy. Yeah, that was the closest one that I got to, that I actually saw her. All dressed.
All dressed up.
All dressed in her, yeah, in her little hat and her turned up toes and her striped stockings. And, oh my word. We used to make fairy houses, Pat and I, and we would take matchboxes and make them into beds and, you know, put grass in them or cotton or, you know, whatever, things like that. We had fairy houses all around.
That's so cute.
I think that school in those days was so much more interesting and fun. And having all the different grades together, you learned a lot from them, from their teaching. And you also had the interaction with all ages of kids in your classroom. And the teachers were pretty strict, and you learned what you were supposed to learn and you were doing what you were supposed to do, but without being real harsh disciplinarians. They didn't have to be harsh. Everybody was happy doing what they were happy what they were doing, with what they were doing.
A good environment,
I
happy
think
environment.
A good environment, yes.
So that it was easier, I think, maybe.
Yeah.
To
It
just
was,
do what you're
well,
supposed
it was
to do.
so,
More enjoyable.
I think that everybody wanted to be there.
Mhm.
Kids weren't saying, "Oh, I'm sick today. I don't want to go to school."
Mhm.
We were all there because we wanted
You
to be
wanted
there.
to be there.